Arthur was lounging in his living room, flipping through a travel magazine, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a call from Uncle Joe, his outdoorsy and adventurous uncle. "Hey, Joe, long time no see," Arthur answered, smiling. Uncle Joe's booming voice came through the phone. "I've got an extra spot for a fishing trip this weekend at my cabin by the lake. How about you and your friend Jeff come along? It'll be a great getaway." Arthur's eyes lit up. "That sounds fantastic. Jeff's never been fishing before. He'll love it." "Perfect. I'll see you both Friday evening. Don't forget to bring your fishing gear," Uncle Joe reminded him before hanging up. Arthur put his phone down and turned to find Jeff, who was in the kitchen, attempting to levitate a bowl of cereal with a mischievous grin. "Jeff, how do you feel about going fishing this weekend?" Arthur asked. Jeff's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Fishing? I've never been. What do you do? Is there magic involved?" Arthur laughed. "Not exactly. It's more about patience, skill, and enjoying nature. My Uncle Joe invited us to his cabin by the lake. It'll be a fun adventure." Jeff clapped his hands. "I'm in. Let's start packing." Arthur focused on packing the essentials: fishing rods, tackle boxes, and camping gear. He laid everything out carefully, ensuring they had all they needed for a successful fishing trip. Jeff, however, approached packing with his usual enthusiasm for the bizarre. He tossed in his rubber duck, a few glowing orbs, and a fishing net that sparkled with enchantments. Arthur watched with amusement as Jeff tried to fit a small cauldron into his bag. "Jeff, we're going fishing, not summoning sea creatures," Arthur chuckled. "But you never know when you might need a bit of magic," Jeff replied with a grin, reluctantly leaving the cauldron behind but keeping the glowing orbs. Friday afternoon, they loaded up Arthur's car and set off on their journey. The drive was scenic, with winding roads leading them through lush forests and rolling hills. Jeff was full of questions about fishing. "What's the biggest fish you've ever caught?" Jeff asked, his curiosity piqued. Arthur thought for a moment. "Probably a big bass when I was younger. Uncle Joe is the real expert, though. He's been fishing his whole life." As they approached the lake, the scenery became even more picturesque. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water. Uncle Joe's rustic cabin stood near the shore, with smoke gently wafting from the chimney. Uncle Joe was waiting for them on the porch, a broad smile on his face. He was a grizzled man with a friendly demeanor, wearing a worn fishing hat and plaid shirt. "Welcome to my cabin," Joe greeted them warmly. "Arthur, good to see you. And you must be Jeff." Jeff stepped forward, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Uncle Joe. I'm excited to learn how to fish." Joe shook Jeff's hand, chuckling. "You're in for a treat. Fishing is a mix of patience, skill, and a bit of luck. Let's get you both settled in, and we'll start fresh in the morning." Inside the cabin, Joe showed them their cozy quarters and the main living area, adorned with fishing memorabilia and outdoor gear. Jeff was fascinated by everything, from the mounted fish on the walls to the collection of fishing rods in the corner. As they settled in for the evening, Uncle Joe began explaining the basics of fishing to Jeff, showing him different types of bait and how to tie a proper knot. "Fishing is all about timing and understanding the water," Joe explained. "Tomorrow, we'll head out to my favorite spot and see if we can't catch something good." Jeff listened intently, absorbing every bit of information. Arthur watched with a smile, enjoying Jeff's eagerness to learn. That night, they sat around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter. Jeff's excitement was palpable, and Arthur couldn't help but feel optimistic about the adventure that awaited them. As they turned in for the night, the sounds of the lake and the forest lulled them to sleep, promising a day of new experiences and memorable moments ahead. The next morning, Jeff and Arthur woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and bacon sizzling on the stove. Uncle Joe was already up, preparing a hearty breakfast to fuel them for their fishing adventure. "Morning, boys," Joe greeted them cheerfully. "Eat up. We've got a big day ahead." Jeff's eyes widened at the spread on the table. This Looks amazing. Thanks, Uncle Joe. After breakfast, they gathered their gear and headed down to the lake. The morning air was crisp and fresh, the surface of the lake glistening under the early sun. Jeff looked around in awe, taking in the beauty of the surroundings. "All right, Jeff," Uncle Joe said, handing him a fishing rod. "Let's start with the basics." Joe demonstrated how to bait the hook, cast the line, and wait patiently for a bite. Jeff watched closely, his excitement bubbling over as he tried to emulate Joe's movements. "Cast it out nice and easy," Joe instructed. Jeff gave it a go, his first cast landing the line a few feet away. He frowned slightly but remained determined. "You'll get the hang of it," Arthur encouraged, casting his own line out smoothly. Jeff's initial attempts were a mix of comedy and chaos. He tangled the line, dropped the bait, and even managed to hook his own hat at one point. Arthur and Uncle Joe couldn't help but laugh, but Jeff's determination never wavered. "You're doing great, Jeff," Joe said with a chuckle. "It takes practice. You'll get there." Jeff grinned sheepishly. "Thanks, Uncle Joe. I'll keep trying." The morning passed with more practice and a few small catches by Arthur and Joe. Jeff, still eager, kept casting and reeling, his persistence admirable. Unable to resist, Jeff decided to use a bit of magic to try and attract the fish. He discreetly tossed one of his glowing orbs into the water, hoping it would draw the fish to his line. At first, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, fish started jumping out of the water in a synchronized dance, leaping and twirling in midair. Jeff's eyes widened in amazement, while Arthur and Joe watched in stunned silence. "What in the world?" Joe muttered, bewildered. Jeff quickly realized his mistake and flicked his wrist, causing the glowing orb to vanish. The fish settled back into the water, and everything returned to normal. "Sorry about that," Jeff said sheepishly. "I might have used a bit of magic." Joe laughed, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises, Jeff. Just try to keep it low-key, all right?" Jeff nodded, still determined to catch a fish the traditional way. He focused, casting his line out again, this time without any magical assistance. As the day wore on, Jeff's persistence began to pay off. He grew more comfortable with the rod and reel, his casts becoming more accurate. Finally, he felt a tug on his line. "Arthur! Uncle Joe! I think I've got something!" Jeff exclaimed, his heart racing with excitement. "Keep the line steady and reel it in slowly," Joe instructed, standing beside him. Jeff followed Joe's guidance, carefully reeling in the line. After a few tense moments, he managed to pull in a sizable bass. The fish flopped around, glistening in the sunlight. "I did it! I caught a fish!" Jeff cheered, holding up his catch proudly. Arthur and Joe clapped him on the back, grinning. "Great job, Jeff," Arthur said. "You've got the hang of it now." Joe nodded in approval. "That's a fine catch, Jeff. You should be proud." As they continued to fish, Jeff's confidence grew. He caught a few more fish, each time more skillfully than the last. The day was filled with laughter, learning, and the thrill of the catch. By the time the sun began to set, Jeff felt like a true fisherman. They gathered their gear and headed back to the cabin, ready to reflect on their day by the campfire. The fishing trip had been a success, and Jeff couldn't wait to share more adventures with his friends. The next morning, Jeff and Arthur were up early, ready for another day on the lake. The sky was clear and the air was crisp, promising a perfect day for fishing. Jeff, now more confident with his fishing skills, was eager to catch more fish. They settled at Uncle Joe's favorite spot, and it wasn't long before Jeff felt a strong tug on his line. "Arthur! Uncle Joe! I've got something big!" he exclaimed, his heart racing. "Steady, Jeff," Joe advised, moving closer to assist. "Reel it in slowly. Let it tire itself out." Jeff followed Joe's instructions, his hands steady on the rod. The struggle was intense, the fish putting up a good fight. Arthur and Joe watched with anticipation as Jeff skillfully managed the line. After what felt like an eternity, Jeff finally pulled in his catch. A massive, gleaming bass broke the surface of the water, thrashing wildly. With one last effort, Jeff managed to reel it in completely. "Wow, Jeff, that's a huge one," Arthur said, clapping him on the back. Joe nodded in approval, a proud smile on his face. "You've got the hang of it now, Jeff. That's one impressive catch." Jeff beamed with pride, holding up the fish for a photo. "This is amazing. I can't believe I caught it." They took several pictures to commemorate the moment, Jeff's grin wide and genuine in each one. The rest of the morning was spent leisurely fishing, with Jeff catching a few more, albeit smaller fish. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they decided to take a break and enjoy a picnic lunch by the lake. The peaceful setting was perfect for relaxing, with the gentle sound of the water lapping against the shore. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the water. Jeff squinted into the distance and saw a large fish swimming near the surface. It was bigger than any they had seen before, almost mythical in its size and grace. "Uncle Joe, what is that?" Jeff asked, pointing at the massive fish. Joe's eyes widened in recognition. "That's old Gus. He's a legend around here. I've been trying to catch him for years, but he always gets away." Jeff's curiosity was piqued. "Do you mind if I give it a try?" Joe chuckled. "Be my guest. Just be careful. He's a smart one." Jeff prepared his rod with a special bait that Joe provided, and with a deep breath, he cast his line toward old Gus. The fish circled the bait warily before finally taking the hook. What followed was an epic battle of strength and wits. Jeff's rod bent under the strain, and he had to use all his newfound skills to keep control. Arthur and Joe cheered him on, offering advice and encouragement. Finally, after an intense struggle, Jeff managed to reel old Gus closer to the shore. With one last effort, he pulled the giant fish onto the bank. The three of them stared in awe at the massive fish, its scales shimmering in the sunlight. "I can't believe it," Joe exclaimed, clapping Jeff on the back. "You did it, Jeff. You caught old Gus." Jeff, breathless but ecstatic, grinned from ear to ear. "That was incredible. I've never felt anything like it." They took another round of photos, this time with old Gus, before gently releasing the legendary fish back into the lake. It swam away gracefully, disappearing into the depths. That evening, they gathered around a campfire, cooking their catch and sharing stories. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling brightly above them. Jeff felt a deep sense of contentment, the day's adventures replaying in his mind. "This has been the best trip ever," Jeff said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle Joe, for teaching me how to fish." Joe smiled warmly. "You've done great, Jeff. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We'll have to do this again sometime." Arthur looked at Jeff with pride. "You've come a long way, Jeff. I'm glad we got to share this experience." As they sat by the campfire, the warmth of the flames and the companionship of friends created a perfect ending to their adventure. They talked late into the night, making plans for future trips and new experiences. Joe mentioned a nearby mountain trail that was perfect for hiking, and Jeff's eyes lit up with excitement. "Hiking sounds amazing. I've never been on a real hike before." Arthur laughed. "Looks like we've got our next adventure planned." The next morning, they packed up and said their goodbyes. Jeff, now a proud fisherman, was already looking forward to their next trip. They drove back home, the car filled with laughter and stories of their unforgettable weekend. As they arrived home, Jeff couldn't stop talking about all the fun they had and eagerly anticipated their upcoming hiking trip. The fishing trip had not only taught him new skills, but also strengthened the bond between him, Arthur, and Uncle Joe. Their adventure at the lake was just the beginning, and with the promise of more adventures to come, Jeff and Arthur were ready for whatever lay ahead.